Hello.
Hello, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Yes, Wednesday. Today is Wednesday. How's it going?
Going good. Good Wednesday.
Almost the 22nd, so yay.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's get started. Andreas, you have the first point.
Yeah, and I'm happy to announce that we, after upgrading GitLab Common to Postgres 11, we've now deprecated the add column with default helper. So that's been around for a while, basically adding support to add a column with a default, which is more expensive in previous Postgres versions. So that used to go like adding the column without the default, and then updating all the rows and batches to the default value, and then finally flipping over the default value. And with Postgres 11, that's better. That was an improvement there where you can just add a column with a default with a not null constraint. And that's an inexpensive operation. And only when the record gets rewritten, the default value gets physically written to disk, basically. And with the change that is linked in there, we deprecate just the old helper. So feel free to just use add column standard Rails helper for all situations when you want to add a column going forward. And as Myra also mentioned on the agenda, there is a slight problem with the backport strategy. So with old versions, prior to 13.0, we would still have to use add column with default. So using that old helper, because prior to 13.0, we can't rely on the fact that you have Postgres 11. So you might still have an older version. So when we backport things, just make sure we use the old helper. And I think there's no risk of that blowing up on us without noticing, because the old versions, so prior to this deprecation, they still have a Rubocop around that complain about using add column with a default value in the old version. So that if we don't realize that we're backporting this, the Rubocop should blow up at that stage.
I think it should be prior to 12.9 because we officially require having Postgres 11 install of 12.10. So it should be fine if someone backports with that column to 12.10, because we will assume that they are going to have a Postgres 11 version installed. But if we backport the same change to a 12.9 version, then we need to use the add column method helper, right? This is kind of a bit confusing.
So I think we started requiring Postgres 11 from 12.10, if I'm not mistaken, right? This is the last minor version in the 12 cycle.
Yeah, it is, at least it is documented in our docs, so I am just going to take that as the official version.
Right. And then whenever we have we're using, or we want to add a column with a default in previous versions, so prior to 12.10, we can't assume Postgres 11. And in those versions, we would still have to use add column with default. So the previous, more involved helper method, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I also, yes.
Talk, sorry.
Okay, there is only one a little bit tangential that makes it more complicated, because if we are backporting an add column that is adding a column to a large table, we shouldn't even use add column with default, right? So it should be like contraindicated, or it should be restricted, and we shouldn't do that to a lower version. So I have tried to add that note into our documentation. Hopefully it will be just for this release, because in the next one, the lowest version we will support will be 12.10. So just something to keep in mind when we review security merge requests. Is everyone clear, or is that just confusing? I'm going to assume everything is clear. Okay.
Well, going forward, it's very easy except for backports. Just use add column. Don't bother with the old helper. Just for backports, it's more difficult.
Yeah, good summary. Alina, you have the next point.
Yes, thank you. So I had the chance to work in a version app, and I was noticing they're also discussing with Doug at some point that we're having some duplicated code there for migration helpers, and I was wondering how to approach that. And thank you. I saw that there is already some work in progress to move that that out, and I think that's great. So yeah, that was it. Wanted to bring this a bit in discussion.
Yeah, I think we were talking about moving, or there was an idea from Alper about moving these helpers into a gem, which I think it is a nice alternative.
Yeah, actually, Kras opened an MR2, which I linked there 2 months ago, but it seems to be not progressing that fast. Like, I think at least for some migration helpers or some database utilities, it makes sense to have them as gem and release them to the open source community maybe.
Yeah, I think that makes sense as well, Alper. You know, we've copied a lot of them over to the version app. Some of them, I don't know if we've looked at them or not, may not be as necessary with Rails 6 because some things were solved in Rails 6. I've seen that we're using them for at times. And there's some things that we've had to modify to fit the version app a little bit, but perhaps those can be more generalized as well. And perhaps we can just start off with like one of the most common helpers and go from there.
That's an open question. If you wish, let's discuss it as the versions app developers. If we can make a subset, maybe a gem based on Kras's MR, then maybe we may try to convince back the database team to use it. I think not a lot of people are coding in versions app or customers app, so we are kind of, that's our problem.
That makes sense too. I know I started with some of that concept with upstreaming the large table comp to GitLab styles and then using it in the version app. And then hopefully we can come back around and use that upstream cop in the GitLab project once we upgrade RuboCop to the GitLab styles level.
All right. Well, thank you for bringing this up. It is an interesting problem, and yeah, an interesting solution too. So moving on, I just wanted to say thank you to all the people that have signed up, whether as a reviewer or as a trainee. I think we are up by 5 people. Well, if I take a look at the related merge request, and I think 6 people have signed up so far, so that is great. And some interesting facts, we have been reviewing around 120, like an average, the last 3 releases of the current release. And I mean, it is like a high number. So reviewers and trainees are well, more than welcome. And I also wanted to thank you, all of you that have been involved in such a numerous reviews, because, well, it is not an easy job. So great job, team. And yeah, does anyone have a comment on this? I'm gonna take that as a no. Okay, Andreas, you have the next point.
Yeah, this is really fresh of what we've just been doing. But I just wanted to ask this question here as well. We're currently working on the partitioning side, and we're taking audit log as an example, and we're sort of working on the idea of partitioning audit log by time. And that would basically result in like one table audit events, and this one has maybe even hundreds of partitions, or one for each one, just basically. And you can think about other tables. Maybe they have hash partitioning. You create a lot of partitions for those. And sort of a common scheme that I've worked with is putting those partitions into their separate schema. So you still have the same sort of parent tables. You still have them in the public schema. So audit events looks like before, it's in the public schema. Just the fact that it's partitioned, and those partitions are basically physical tables and they live inside a separate schema. And the reason for doing that is really just convenience, because when you look at the public schema and it has maybe ultimately thousands of partitions, it's very hard to see the actual tables that you're working with, and most of the partitions are identical anyway, so it's not really useful to have them mixed up with the public schema tables. But it's mostly a convenience concern, basically. The question I wanted to ask is if anybody sees a problem with creating a separate schema from public, because this is really the first time that we're doing that. And note, this is the same database. It's really just a way of logically grouping tables inside the same database. So there's no separate database that we introduce. We ran into an issue with Geo that we're currently looking at, because Geo makes it a bit more difficult with foreign data wrappers and such. But I was wondering if there may be other assumptions where we kind of assume that there is only one schema, that we only have the public schema around, or if there is any other problems that you can already identify.
So Andreas, you want to create another schema, but so another database too, right?
No, it's the same database. So one database always has a public schema. That's the default schema. And we would just create another schema inside the same database for the partitions.
No, I mean, that was a discussion in the training too. So the machine, the Postgres cluster, let's say on one single machine is a single database cluster. And then every database like GitLab HQ production is one single database, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and public is just a schema for it.
Exactly. This is the same database, physical database. And then schema is really just a way of logically grouping things, or basically putting a namespace on object names. So you would have to sort of, if you refer to a partition explicitly, you would go by putting the schema name, partitions, for example, dot the partition name to explicitly refer to that.
Does it share the same settings like timeouts, all various things, and how does it stand behind the same PG bouncer configuration?
That's all the same. It's really just internal to the database schema in that sense.
Just another idea for you, or maybe if the database team needs another toy for testing partitioning. So the product analytics events table is coming. That's Sid, the CEO, created it. It's the Snowflow inspired events table. and now DZ is coding it. So Alina had the idea that maybe I should give her the voice. Alina.
Yeah, we were thinking that could be a good chance to have from the beginning partition table. I think I've mentioned it in some in the last call also.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I guess it's always good if we can start with partitioning from the beginning. It's much easier than adding that later. We're currently focused on the audit events side because that's a rather simple example for us. And what we'll get from that is also the migration helpers around that. So once we have them, maybe it's easier to apply that to the product. What was it? Analytics events, right? I don't know if that works out timing wise.
I don't know either. I think that we have it for this milestone at least planned. I'm not sure for the outcome.
Is there a cost of not starting with a partition? So I mean, we won't use it on GitLab.com immediately. So actually on GitLab.com, there are 15 million records per day on that table, which we won't do, by the way, just to give you an idea.
The problem with partitioning is that if you decide to partition, for example, events afterwards, you will have to recreate everything. So it's not like you can take the existing table and split it. You have to. So if it's a 300 gigabyte table, you will have to create the partition table and the partitions, and then add all the small partitions. So the migration will be a little bit long. Do you agree, Andreas?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is definitely more expensive adding that later.
Do we have like an estimate of how much in execution time does it take to create a partition table by date, the execution? Like, I'm noticing that it is in a regular migration, and I guess it should be in a regular migration because it should be deployed before Canary. So I guess what I'm just asking is like, is this creation like fast execution wise?
Creating the partition for a particular month?
Yeah, basically just executing this migration partition audit events by date. Is it safe to execute it in a regular migration?
Oh yeah, it's really just like creating empty tables. So you basically can't go in and teach an existing table a partitioning pattern or so. You can only go in and create a new empty table, tell it to be partitioned by something from the start, and then add the data later to it. Adding the data later is the expensive part because you have to copy stuff over. But creating initially the partitioning schemes is just like creating regular tables, basically.
Just wanted to mention that we need to change our search path if we decide to add new schema.
That's correct if we ever want to sort of explicitly interact with the separate schema. In this case, it is sort of a detail that we don't care about really because the main table, so the parent table of all those partitions, it still lives in the public schema. So from a client perspective, we really don't care if the partitions live in a public schema or in the partitioned schema or in a separate one. But yeah, if you really want to sort of explicitly talk to a individual partition, then you have to change the search path, or you just make sure that the object names are always qualified enough.
Yeah, but the idea with partitioning is that you keep the top, the partition table as it was. So you reference only the partition table that resides in the public schema. And then you have all the details in the other schema, which are the real tables, and they're hidden. So the application will never know that this is a partitioned schema or a real table, and the only one accessed is in public. The only reason to want to change the path is if we wanted to do partitioning manually in the application, a partition coordinator, so that accessing the partitions directly for optimization reasons or whatever. But I don't think that we have such an intent at the moment.
I'm curious. So it seems that with the new schema, it's sort of like it's the same functionality as public. We're just kind of namespacing it separately so that we don't get too cluttered. If we eventually wanted to use schemas for other reasons, like for specific functionality to separate out, users, permissions, and things like that, would there be any issues caused by having these partition schemas also in that same area? I can't think of any reason, but thought it'd be worth asking.
So you can always move objects across schemas, so that's really just like renaming a table. You can tell it to basically live in a different schema. So if you ever wanted to sort of separate things in the public schema, maybe we would want to do the same thing for the partitions then, to keep that sort of in alignment. But just from a schema perspective, moving things around, that's always possible.
Cool.
The only thing that I can think of is that if we were to start using multiple schemas, we will just have to change our SQL guidelines like we have now, that if you write an SQL query, always prepend the table name before the attribute name, and we will have to update it to prepend the schema also. So if you directly access and write queries not using URL, you will have to go through all the path. I cannot see anything else changing.
Do we have like a rollout strategy for this table? Like, do we plan to also migrate the data this on 13.1 or perhaps in some months?
So yeah, this is something that we're working on. Can't say if that makes the milestone, but that's the next priority for us, I would say. Don't know, Patrick, if you can add more details to that, but basically we're copying that table over, and that takes a long time.
Yeah, I think for the actual changes that would need to be made, I mean, hopefully we would have that ready for 13.1, but yeah, the migration, we hadn't really looked at how long we think that would actually take in production. Probably a significant amount of time though.
Does anyone have anything else to add? Okay, so the next point is an MR that I noticed from Patrick about reducing the conflict-free schema version, in which basically we no longer introduce the versions into the structure file, but we just create a file. And I think it is great. Just encouraging everyone to see it. It has like, it is kind of difficult to merge it right now because, well, we are still like before the 22nd and we are receiving a lot of commits, and well, we have conflicts, but we are probably going to merge it next week, I guess. Patrick, do you have a comment about this MR?
Not really, but it wasn't my idea, so I don't want to take credit for the idea. I think Alper came up with the idea. I just wrote the code, so.
Well, this is going to help us a lot, I think. I would expect that everybody at least once, if not twice, ran into that issue. where you create a migration, you push that, and like with the next person doing a similar thing, you have this like really annoying conflict on the structure SQL where you just want to make sure that the schema changes, sorry, the schema versions go in from both of those migrations, and that's the only conflict to have, and you rebase because of that, and incurs a lot of waiting time and CI costs probably as well. So that's a really good change to have.
Yeah, I think so too. So I felt like one question when I was reviewing that is that how do we ensure that when you create a migration, we actually include the file? I think at the moment it is going to be like through a code review, and we must be mindful that a file, like an empty file, should be included. But perhaps this is something that Danger or Rubocop should alert, because it can be easily missed in a large merge request.
Yeah, I saw your comment. Yeah, that's a good idea. I'm not really sure. I have to think through how we would implement that. But I think that's definitely something we would want to look at as a follow-up to prevent that. So I'll create an issue to track that. That's a good idea.
Cool. And also, what about, I also thought about, well, backporting, because I guess if we want to backport now a change to a prior version, then we need to make sure the version is actually in the structure file, right? And the file is not included because that is just going to generate noise. Perhaps we need guidelines also for this change, like some documentation.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Yeah, I'll have to think about that. That makes sense. Yeah, I think in general I have to kind of do a write-up because it's it's going to be a development change. I have to kind of let the other developers know what's happening. That's something I was going to hopefully look at, sometime next day or two. So I'll take that in consideration when I'm writing that.
Yeah, I mean, just because I am mostly involved in patch releases and security releases, and I am pretty sure this question is going to come up. So it is a good idea to be like, to have something to point developers at when someone asks like, hey, what I'm going to do with my change. So yeah. Okay, well, either way, this is a great change, and I am looking forward to have it. Okay, so Andreas, back to you.
Thanks. Now we just talked about the product analytics events table, and Albert and Alina, you mentioned the DMR. I just looked at that again, and I was wondering if we have more insight into why that table is so like wide. It really looks like in maybe a staging table in a data warehouse, and hearing that we're like putting, what was it, 15 million events per day, might be a concern going forward.
So I think as a first step, there is set up a limitation. So it's going to be only 100 events per second, I think. But if I remember right, the structure of that table was just followed as what is in general structure of a snowplow event. I'm not really familiar how that looks like, but I think that's in that direction.
Yeah, that's the lockdown quarantine times project by the CEO. So if you have ideas there, you may drop. DZ is currently trying to reshape it. But if, I mean, Andreas, any ideas, it's the right time to come there. I wrote there some ideas. So it's kind of MVC iteration towards that goal. So feel free to comment there. DZ started working on it a week ago. So you see that migration and everything is quite not ready yet. But if you have like fundamental ideas, anyone, just it's the right time to really focus, because this is going to be huge. And also you may see that it's used in the graphs. So it's not only like an audit events some table which is insert only, it is also grouped and shown in charts, which makes it quite challenging.
Cool, thanks.
I might be lacking, sorry.
No, go ahead, Mara.
Okay. I might be lacking some context, but do we need to have all of these attributes in a single table? Like, this table is huge.
Yeah, that's the Snowplow standard event attributes. So, good question. You may drop it in the MR. I dropped one comment. Just, I don't know how it will end up, but it's just beginning of something. So it's the perfect time to have fundamental encouragement for the MR.
Great, thanks. I was also just I like the broader context. I was just looking at it, and it looks very much like denormalized. And then at the same time, if we add a lot of events or a lot of data to that, that might become a problem. Cool. I'll take a look at the MR later. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for bringing that up. Okay, I think this is the first time that we have so many people in the call. So I am very happy about it. If someone can take a screenshot of this for the posterity, it will be great. I think I took one. Woo, okay, awesome. Okay, so does anyone else have a point to add or something else that wants to discuss? Well, just one last question. Sorry, with this Postgres update version, I think we talked about a little bit last week about what are the improvements that are we looking for, and one of them was adding the column with default that is going to be like faster. Do we have anything else like on the agenda for the next milestones?
For leveraging Postgres 11 features?
Yeah, for taking advantage of having like Postgres 11 as a requirement.
Right. So I think the partitioning is going to be a huge feature that we're using, or we're starting to use now. I think that's one of the major reasons why we were pushing for that upgrade in the first place. And now that we have it, we can start working on it, and that's already in progress. So looking forward to seeing that happen.
Yeah, good
also,
point.
Less exclusive logs for a lot of operations. If you check search for logs in the page, you will see that there are less exclusive logs. And that was also one of the things that affect foreign keys, I think, also are affected by that, and some other things.
Great, awesome. Well, thank you. And well, since we don't have any other item on the agenda, well, thank you everyone for joining, and I hope you have a good rest of your day and week. See you next time.
Thanks, Mara.